In the fall of 1983, 4 men set out to hunt deer in Virginia. One of them would never return home. Authorities determined the hunter's death was accidental, but an insurance adjuster believed otherwise. A year later, the FBI had only one option. Agents had to get the suspect's confession on tape before their witness also became the hunter's target.
Over 1,000 hunting accidents are reported in the United States each year. Fewer than 10% of them are fatal. But when one hunter's death seemed suspicious, the FBI was called in to investigate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would have to determine if their suspect was a grieving father figure or a man who murdered a friend in cold blood.
On November 21st, 1983, near Roanoke, Virginia, 41-year-old David Fisher hunted deer with the 3 people who were closest to him. His 16-year-old stepson, his friend 22-year-old Bobby Mulligan, and 18-year-old David Wilkey. Wilkey looked up to Fisher as the father he never had. The group had been hiking since the early morning, but no one had spotted a deer. $50 was wagered on the first to shoot one. Fisher's stepson was bored and asked to go off on his own. He told him not to go far. The teenager had little experience in the woods. He walked a short distance when he heard someone yell, "Deer." Then he heard a gunshot. The boy ran back to see if anyone had won the $50. He found the group a few yards from where he left them, sitting on the incline of a small hill. 18-year-old David Wilkey had been shot. He was still alive, but they were miles from the nearest phone. Fisher told his stepson to run and get help. 30 minutes later, he reached rescuers. Lieutenant Michael Ashworth of Virginia's Department of Game and Inland Fisheries was called in.
I received a call from the Bedford County Sheriff's Department somewhere around 3 p.m. stating that there had been a hunting accident. I proceeded immediately to the scene. It was on the south side of Bedford County off of Stone Mountain Road.
Authorities were too late. David Wilkey died before help could reach him. The lieutenant asked the hunters to describe what happened. Bobby Mulligan said that when they spotted the deer, David Wilkey got excited and ran ahead.
I see it!
Mulligan and Fisher followed behind. As he started down the slope, Mulligan explained that he slipped in the dry leaves. His gun discharged when he hit the ground. To Lieutenant Ashworth, it was clear that Mulligan was a novice with firearms since he had made such a critical error.
I said, you know, you would have had this firearm cocked. And he said, yeah, I did. I was carrying it cocked. When I had heard the deer, then I cocked the gun, which was obvious he was, you know, very ignorant of safety, basic safety rules.
The back, I mean...
David Fisher told the lieutenant he saw the whole thing happen from the top of the slope. He was behind the 2 younger men when the shot went off. He saw Wilkey go down and rush to the side of the fallen teenager. He told investigators he placed a rag over the wound in Wilkey's back in an effort to stop the bleeding.
Go get help now.
The father figure tried to comfort his dying friend until help could arrive. But after only a few minutes, Wilkey stopped breathing. Investigators examined the surrounding area to determine if there was any physical evidence to corroborate their story. Investigators found the spot where Mulligan had slipped.
Hey guys. Take a look here, please. Show me a pretty good shot.
The size of the wound in Wilkey's back seemed consistent with a gunshot fired from where the hunter had hit the ground. Nothing they could find contradicted Mulligan and Fisher's story.
I came running down the path there, and I saw a deer, and I ran. I slipped, and I fell, and the gun just went off.
Officials then turned their attention to the weapon that fired the fatal shot.
Yeah, it's the shotgun.
They found that it had been undisturbed since it was last fired. When the lieutenant opened the barrel, he discovered the spent cartridge was still inside. The men were not placed under arrest, but investigators asked them to come to the sheriff's office for further questioning.
Set it down.
Authorities were still uncertain if they were going to press charges against the hunters.
Come with me.
Bobby Mulligan seemed to be very sincerely remorseful. He was crying at times and talking about the fact that he had hunted very little. But it looked like that it was exactly as what it appeared to be, a simple hunting accident. And we do have accidents that occur that way.
At the station, the two men were interviewed once more in separate rooms. Their stories never changed. Unlike Bobby Mulligan, David Lee Fisher remained composed and assured his stepson that everything would be okay.
Don't be so. It's not the same.
Since the hunters had inadvertently wandered onto private land, they were charged with hunting on posted property. The man who fired the fatal shot, Bobby Mulligan, was charged additionally with reckless use of a firearm and hunting without a big game license.
Sir, being charged. Hunting without a permit.
The charges were misdemeanors.
You'll have court date. Trespass.
Fisher and Mulligan would need to answer them in court. Until then, they were allowed to return home to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Being charged. Reckless use of a firearm.
As standard procedure, David Wilkey's body was autopsied. The cause of death was determined to be a transection of the aorta and lacerations of the lungs due to a single projectile. In addition to the 12-gauge slug, the medical examiner extracted cardboard wadding that had also been discharged from the shotgun shell. Examiners confirmed the slug was fired from Mulligan's rifle. A month later, Fisher and Mulligan defended their misdemeanor charges in Virginia's General District Court. The judge gave Mulligan a suspended sentence and fined him $585. Fisher was fined $220. The property officer returned the shotgun to the men, and the case was closed. Two days later, an insurance company received a claim on the dead boy's life insurance. The policy promised to pay $100,000 in the event that Wilkey's death was accidental. Though Wilkey's signature appeared on the forms, he was not the policy's owner. His close friend, David Fisher, was the owner and the sole beneficiary.
I don't like the
This wasn't illegal, but it struck the agent as strange since Fisher wasn't listed as the boy's father, nor as his business partner.
John?
The company decided to contest the claim.
This is claiming an accidental death.
On January 6, 1984, they hired independent claims director Harlan Davis to determine if David Wilkey's death was in fact accidental.
They contacted our office and requested that we complete an investigation to determine the relationship between Bobby Mulligan, David Fisher, and David William Wilkey, and also to check police records, obtain a medical examiner's report, and to get in it and develop the circumstances surrounding this death.
Davis attempted to contact Fisher and Mulligan, but the claims director was unable to reach them. He was able to reach Wilkey's single mother in Florida.
This is Diane. Yes.
She told him that her son had left home for Charlotte, North Carolina less than a year before.
Who are you again? Oh.
The 18-year-old had heard that his estranged father was in Charlotte visiting relatives. Wilkey hadn't seen his dad since childhood. His mother said that he caught up with his father briefly, but his dad left Charlotte before they could become reacquainted. The father wanted nothing to do with him. That's when Wilkey met Fisher.
David Wilkey was looking for a father, which he didn't have. His father and mother were separated. They were distant from him. He felt like he wanted to get to know his father, and this is the reason he really fell into a relationship with David Fisher was because he was looking for this father figure, and it became a friendship.
Shortly after her son died, Fisher called to tell her that the teenager wished to be cremated, but had no life insurance. The mother believed Fisher and ordered the cremation, since Fisher seemed to have been close with her son. The claims director finally caught up with David Fisher to ask him why the policy had been purchased.
We'd like to know what
Fisher replied that Wilkey had wanted life insurance because he was planning to get married. His fiancée did not want insurance, so the 18-year-old turned to Fisher. Since Wilkey had no money, Fisher gave him a loan and a job working for him to pay it off. Fisher was the owner and operator of Fisher Services, a small business that employed several people, including Bobby Mulligan. Morgues and mortuaries called Fisher Services when they needed a body transported to their facilities from accident scenes. Fisher and his men worked mostly after 11 p.m. He didn't get paid unless people died. On a good week, the work was lucrative, but when there were no bodies to transport, he needed other ways to get paid.
This is an interesting relationship.
The investigator questioned why Fisher had paid the insurance premium if Wilkey was making income. The businessman replied that he only wrote the checks to the insurance company after Wilkey paid him first.
I don't know what else I can tell you.
Fisher had an answer for every anomaly. In spite of Fisher's deflections, the investigator managed to get an important piece of information from him. The new address of Bobby Mulligan, the man who fired the gun that killed David Wilkey.
Mulligan? Bobby Mulligan? Yeah. I like that SBO.
The claims director found Mulligan at a pizza parlor in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
I'd like to talk to you. First of all, would you give me your name, your address?
Mulligan didn't have much to add to what Davis had already heard.
100 Main Street.
The claims investigator concluded his inquiry in the spring of 1984. His firm gave their assessment to the insurance company.
We recommended strongly to them that they not pay the policy and that further investigation be followed up to determine any other information that might shed some light onto this shooting, that it was not exactly as it looked on the surface.
Well, would you sign
The
an
insurance
affidavit
company
to that
sent the
effect?
case to an attorney in Greensboro, North Carolina. Fisher signed an affidavit vouching that he had seen the deceased sign the policy. The lawyer asked Fisher to describe the shooting one more time. Once again, Fisher indicated that Mulligan was 15 feet behind Wilkey when the gun discharged.
Have you seen what's in
The attorney confronted Fisher with the coroner's report.
You might like to take a look at it.
2 pieces of cardboard wadding from the shotgun shell had been found inside Wilkey's chest. For the wadding to have lodged there, it was likely the shot had been fired from much closer than 15 feet. The evidence was not strong enough to prove murder, but it was strong enough to win a civil suit.
We are prepared to make you an offer.
He offered Fisher $25,000 to settle out of court, the amount the lawyer figured it would cost to defend the case. Fisher accepted.
Now, if you will sign here, please.
They were afraid that if they did not settle the claim for some amount, that David Fisher would possibly sue them for not following the law and paying a claim when he had a legitimate claim.
David Fisher had just made $25,000 from the death of David Wilkey, his friend and employee. The portion of that money he loaned to a friend would soon be paid back in ways he never expected. On a hunting trip to Virginia, 18-year-old David Wilkey's shooting death had been ruled accidental. The man the dead teenager had looked up to, 41-year-old David Fisher, had been paid $25,000 as the sole beneficiary of the boy's life insurance policy. Then, a year and a half later, in the spring of 1985, Special Agent Robert McDowell of the FBI Charlotte Field Office received a call from one of his informants.
Early on in 1985, I had a source, and one day he came to me with a story that a friend of his had been hired and refused to take the job to murder somebody for insurance money. I at first didn't understand exactly why he was bringing me this information and why this individual is willing to talk about this now.
Over the course of 2 more weeks, the agent continued to speak to his source.
Well,
The informant said his friend's name was Bear and that Bear's life was in danger. Agents wanted to speak to this person at the Charlotte FBI field office. But the source said Bear was reluctant since he was an ex-convict. He would only meet them in a neutral place. They agreed to meet in a park. Special Agent James Lillard, who's currently working undercover, helped Agent Bob McDowell develop the case.
Working right beside Bob, we asked me if I wanted to go out with him to interview his source and find out a little bit more about this information.
Lillard would keep watch from a distance in case his partner was being set up. Bear arrived on schedule. His real name was Gerald Stedham. Stedham said that a man named David Fisher was threatening his life because Stedham owed him several $1,000s from a personal loan. He also accused Fisher of murdering 18-year-old David Wilkey more than a year earlier. Agents were skeptical.
When you hear something like that, it initially sounds pretty fantastic and you kind of scratch your head. You're thinking, is this for real or not? Stedham may have been exaggerating a little bit, and maybe he exaggerated about the story in itself.
look, I'm not wearing
He hoped the FBI would protect him in exchange for information about his old friend David Fisher. When the agent asked if Stedham was willing to wear a wire to prove the story, the ex-convict refused.
He had his run-ins with law enforcement officers before, And he pretty much said right from the very beginning that he didn't trust police, FBI, or anybody else. So at that point, it was a matter of trying to gain Stedham's trust to the point that he would actually work with us and not back out of the situation once he started getting into it.
Agent McDowell needed to find out more about Fisher. A background check revealed that David Fisher had several aliases and 25 prior convictions for crimes ranging from larceny to forgery. Years earlier, Fisher had testified in the trial of an underworld crime figure and was then entered into the Witness Protection Program. Not long after, his protection was removed since his continuing criminal behavior was in violation of its rules. Agents also checked records in Virginia to confirm Stedham's story.
Yes, there was, in fact, a hunting accident where a gentleman by the name of David Wilkey was shot in the back, supposedly accidentally. So that in itself verified that this definitely happened. Then the next step is to find out if there were any motives here. I mean, why did this happen? And if there was any other details.
McDowell arranged another meeting with Stedham to find out more. Stedham refused to come to the FBI office. Instead, he agreed to meet in the parking lot of a local restaurant. Once again, Stedham promised to tell the FBI anything they wanted to know about Fisher, but refused to wear a wire to secure evidence. If Fisher discovered the wire, Stedham believed he would certainly be killed. He didn't trust that the FBI would protect him if his cover was blown. They were interrupted before McDowell was able to convince him.
I was speaking to him when suddenly screaming and yelling came from a local restaurant. And I realized that there was an armed robbery taking place at the time. And I asked Gerald Stedham just to step off to the side.
FBI!
The thief was stopped by the agent before he could flee.
Get down!
Stedham was speechless. At first, he wondered if the agents had staged the robbery to convince him to cooperate. When he was sure the arrest was real, his attitude towards the FBI changed.
And at that point, I realized that I had gained his trust as somebody who knew what he was doing. So from that point on, it was pretty easy to be able to get Stedham to believe that we were going to protect them and be able to get the information that we needed.
How can I help you?
Well, I really think it's me to help you out.
At last, Stedham agreed to meet with agents in the FBI offices. For the first time, agents learned the plan Fisher made to kill his young friend David Wilkey. In the summer of 1983, Fisher suggested that he and Stedham, his old prison buddy, could make $100,000 from a life insurance scam. The ex-convict would take out a policy on their young friend David Wilkey if Stedham would do the killing. Despite working several odd jobs, Wilkey was poor and estranged from his family. Fisher believed no one would miss him.
His proposal was let's take him out into Virginia, let's take him out to an overlook, and we'll get him near the overlook, and I want you to push him off. And that way, he would die, it would look like an accident, and Fisher could collect the insurance money, and which of course he would share with him if he did it.
Well, I'm worried about...
Stedham told agents that he didn't take Fisher seriously until he learned Fisher had obtained the life insurance policy on Wilkey.
Willing to pay to kill him?
Yeah.
And at that point, Stedham said he didn't want anything to do with it. He backed out, which again made Fisher absolutely furious, to the point of almost a hatred developing between his old friend Gerald Stedham and David Fisher.
Me, one day, I remember seeing this.
A few months later, when Stedham heard that Wilkey had been killed hunting in Virginia, he knew the death was probably not accidental. Stedham told agents that Fisher later offered him $50,000 to kill the hitman, Bobby Mulligan. The informant believed that Fisher would likely come after him next.
The unfortunate situation was that Fisher hated Stedham at this point. I mean, actually would probably kill him. So we realized that the only way we were going to be able to get at Fisher through Stedham was to have Stedham tell him that he was sorry that he hadn't paid him back and that he wanted to pay him back even if it's only $100 a week.
$100 a week would give the FBI several opportunities to get Fisher friendly again. Fisher didn't hate Stedham enough to turn down the money. Eventually, agents hoped Stedham could then start reminiscing about what happened in the past. Since the FBI gave Fisher a reason to see their informant, the next step was to get Fisher confessing on tape. A few days later, Fisher asked Stedham to meet him at a coffee shop.
Pick it up. Mr. Stedham, here's what I want you to do.
Stedham was nervous about the wire, but finally agreed to wear it.
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go.
He was terrified, and he was worried that Fisher would frisk him. He was worried that Fisher might get suspicious. So basically, what we advised him to do was to just say, look, tell him that the insurance company is calling him and asking him about this. That way, it'll keep him off the trail of thinking that any law enforcement is involved.
Under the watchful eye of agents, Stedham met with Fisher briefly. The murder suspect said little and avoided the incident in Virginia altogether. Fisher had been an informant himself at one time and suspected Stedham was wired. Outside the restaurant, the mood turned ugly. If agents moved in now, Stedham's cover would be blown. But if they didn't, they feared the suspected murderer would kill again if he found the wire. Agents surveilled murder suspect David Fisher, hoping that their wired informant Gerald Stedham would be able to solicit a confession from his old friend. Fisher arranged the meeting to receive money that Stedham owed him. But Fisher was suspicious of Stedham. To the relief of Stedham and agent James Lillard, Fisher never found the wire.
The first time that we had wired Stedham up and sent him in to talk to Fisher, he was a little too zealous, and he was asking too many poignant questions. So Fisher kind of got a little suspicious and actually frisked him. Fortunately, we had the recording device in a place where he wasn't going to find it.
Unless Fisher called to meet Stedham again, Special Agent Robert McDowell and his team had no other means to get the evidence they needed to arrest Fisher for his 2-year-old crime. 5 days later, Fisher called Stedham to arrange another meeting. Agents were hopeful. The cooperating witness tried to steer the conversation towards Fisher's past crimes, but Fisher once again avoided the topic.
It was one of these situations where Fisher constantly would talk about the fact that he didn't trust anybody, didn't want to talk about anything. Every time Stedham would try to bring up the conversation about what happened back in those days, he would be tight-lipped, he wouldn't do it.
Since Fisher said nothing to corroborate Stedham's version of events, it occurred to agents that perhaps Stedham may be lying, since the ex-convict was reluctant to come forward in the first place.
Yes.
The FBI conducted a polygraph examination to evaluate Stedham's credibility.
Yeah.
Stedham admitted he lied about Fisher, offering him $50,000 to kill Mulligan.
Were you hired to kill Bobby Mulligan?
Yes.
He insisted that Fisher had asked him to do it, but he could not remember the exact amount he'd been offered.
But I can't really remember.
Just answer yes or no.
One of the things we did in order to try to make sure we weren't just chasing our tails was to get Stedham a polygraph exam. And the fact that it was non-conclusive could be that there may be some things that he's saying that he's maybe holding back, but in general, what he's stating is pretty much going to be correct.
Agents believe Stedham was still their best hope of getting to Fisher, since the case lacked any physical evidence. But Fisher, the delivery man for the morgues, was extremely cautious, particularly with Stedham. For the case to move forward, the FBI needed another plan.
So what we're going to have to do is create a situation in Fisher's mind where he felt they were closing in on him, one way or another, to try to stir the conversation.
Agents figured that Fisher would relax his suspicion of being taped while inside his own vehicle. On a day that Fisher asked Stedham to help him with a job, agents decided the time was right.
Technology was just starting to come out, where actually voices would come across on a beeper. And Stedham had one. So we had a female in our office make a phone call to Stedham on his beeper, telling him to call home immediately, making believe that the voice that was coming over the pager was Stedham's girlfriend. So the car stopped, Stedham got out.
For appearances, Stedham briefly spoke to the agent back in the office to let her know the message was received.
I'll tell him. Okay. All right. You'll get it.
Yeah, what was that all about?
When Stedham returned to the car, he told Fisher that it was an insurance agent asking to meet Stedham about an ongoing investigation. Fisher told him that if he kept his mouth shut, their new inquiry would go nowhere since the body had been cremated and that everyone said it was an accident.
He says, and I'm telling you right now, if anybody tries to bring up anything, any witnesses pop their head above the water, it's going to be poof, 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 poof. And those are the sounds that came over the tape. And we realized at that point what Fisher was doing was actually threatening the lives of all witnesses involved in the investigation that took place.
The recording was good, but it was far from a confession. Agents had hoped for more. Unfortunately, over the next several weeks, Fisher avoided Stedham altogether. Agents pursued Mulligan instead. On tape, the shooter described a meeting he had with Fisher after the shooting. Mulligan told him that he had written out the details of what happened and gave it to someone for safekeeping. If Fisher killed Mulligan, those details would be mailed to authorities. Mulligan refused to tell Stedham what he had written or who held the letter. Then, just after midnight on June 16, 1986, an anonymous woman called the FBI to report that a hitman would be coming after Stedham. Agents scrambled to hide their informant at a remote location. They suspected that Fisher had made the threat. Investigators hoped they could secure an arrest warrant before the suspected killer got to Stedham. Fisher had arranged a killing before. Agents feared he would kill again. While agents began to close in on murder suspect David Fisher, the FBI received a death threat against their informant, Gerald Stedham. To protect their key witness, Stedham was held in a remote location until agents could decipher the identity of the caller. Two days later, agents reported their discovery to Stedham.
What is it?
The death threat had been traced to the residence of one of Stedham's friends. Stedham admitted that he had a female friend place the call, but he emphasized that the threat was real. He explained that his longtime friend David Fisher was suddenly acting like a stranger. To Stedham, this could only mean one thing. Fisher, the man who transported bodies for the morgues, was planning to kill him. Agents weren't happy with Stedham's deception, but Agent McDowell knew that the danger to Stedham was genuine.
Stedham told me that Fisher, as a part of being dealing with the morticians and all the different funeral homes, had obtained a number of chemicals that he felt that could be injected into people without them ever knowing, and that they would die without any traces of whatsoever of what caused their death.
The only way to assure Stedham's safety was to get Fisher into custody. Before they could do that, they needed more evidence. In the fall of 1986, a year and a half after the FBI began their investigation, agents finally tracked down David Wilkey's former fiancée. They found her in Florida with a new married name.
What we'd like to do is just begin. Just tell me.
She told agents that she and Wilkey were engaged 6 weeks after they met and planned to move to Florida. To save money, the couple moved in with Fisher for a short time. But after her fiancé was killed, she moved out immediately. She told agents that she felt intimidated by Fisher. Just before Wilkey's death, Fisher had come to her with a proposition to kill the boy for insurance money. Like Stedham, she didn't believe Fisher was serious until Wilkey turned up dead.
What we want to do is, he said, it was get him a few drinks and then give him a good time. I want you to lure him into the pool, get him into the deep end, and then I want you to drown him. And because he can't swim. Then, again, they'll call the hotel security, and it'll look like an accident.
There was something strange about him.
She believed Fisher was responsible for the killing, but she had no way to prove it and feared she could be next.
Well, thank you very much. You've been very helpful. And
we were very surprised. So many people were aware that Fisher was looking for somebody to kill Wilkey. That was incredible. We found it hard to believe that he had gone to that many people regarding some type of scam or some type of setup to murder somebody.
Wilkey's former fiancée had provided a few more pieces of corroborating evidence. Though Special Agent McDowell felt the case still had holes, he believed they had to arrest Fisher and Mulligan before someone else was killed.
We were stretching our luck with David Fisher, knowing the type of person he was, to wind up reaching out and finally making up his mind and killing somebody. We decided that it was time it would be best to go after him, seek indictments, and get him arrested and take him off the street, as well as Bobby Mulligan.
On November 5th, 1986, a Virginia grand jury handed down an indictment charging Fisher and Mulligan with first-degree murder. But with the evidence they had, a conviction was still questionable. McDowell had one last chance to get the taped confession from Fisher that would guarantee a guilty verdict at trial.
I really wanted to try one more time to get Fisher to articulate in detail the fact that he had killed Wilkey for money, and I really would like to have heard a verbal confession from him. And I felt that the only way we could do that was you had to escalate his anger. You had to get him to the point where he just lost control, and then we'd start being truthful.
On the night of November 12th, 1986, 3 years after Wilkey's death, agents wired Stedham after he had baited Fisher with the promise of some easy cash. Stedham had told him that a bail bondsman whom they both knew had a lead on a suspect who had jumped bail. The bondsman, covertly working for the FBI, would ride along.
There were several locations in which the trio would go. And the plan was that the third individual in the car would be able to get out of the car, leaving Fisher and Stedham alone. And that in between each stop, Stedham would escalate the situation by confronting Fisher straight up.
Everybody who will listen, you sitting there.
Stedham needed to push Fisher to the brink in the hopes that he'd reveal his crime. But if Fisher first discovered that Stedham was an informant, the FBI's key witness might end up dead.
paid through the police.
The FBI plan to arrest suspected murderer David Fisher had been set in motion, though agents were still uncertain whether they had enough evidence to convict.
Well, I just
Their
think we
last
got a
hope
problem
rested with
wherever he
informant
is.
Gerald
Bobby
Stedham.
just will not be quiet. He keeps talking and talking.
Wearing a wire, Stedham needed to convince Fisher to talk directly about the killing. A bondsman who Fisher believed was checking leads on a fugitive was in fact working covertly for the FBI.
Tell you how it kills me about Mulligan.
When the bondsman left the car, Stedham provoked the suspected killer to react as Agent McDowell had instructed.
Plenty of money, yeah. He got overpaid. If anybody...
Stedham inside the car had done his job. He really tried to get him cranked up to the point where he would lose control and actually start talking.
Tell you later.
But Fisher started reverting into that mode of being even more quiet, and we knew at that point that what Fisher was doing was going into his planning mode.
To agents, the risk had become too great. If Fisher discovered Stedham was wired, the key witness, the case, and the arrest would be jeopardized. As planned, at around 11 p.m., Stedham suggested that they report back to the bond office that had supposedly hired them. When they arrived, FBI agents and Charlotte police would be waiting.
Once he got out of the car, he pretty much said to Stedham, in no uncertain terms, I'll see you later. Our units in the area were able to converge in on Fisher and had him pretty much surrounded. He wasn't going to run.
Members of the Charlotte Police Department's fugitive unit arrested Fisher, Stedham, and the other bondsmen. They wanted to remove any suspicion that Stedham and the bondsmen had set Fisher up.
The other part of the plan that night was that we had surveillance teams out following Bobby Mulligan, and we knew where he was going to be located. So after the arrest of Fisher took place, we immediately restaged and set up our arrest phase for Bobby Mulligan.
Agents replaced the tape in the recorder Stedham was wearing. As instructed, Stedham had made arrangements earlier that evening to pick up Mulligan from a club where he worked part-time. It was after midnight when the two of them arrived at a tavern. He persuaded Mulligan to sit at the bar, where they'd be visible to the agents outside in case anything went wrong. When units from the Charlotte Police Department arrived, agents directed them to make the arrest.
Mulligan, you're under arrest. Put your hands on top of
For
your
their
head. Don't
informant's
move.
safety and to encourage Mulligan's cooperation, they arrested both men. Though Mulligan and his former employer, David Fisher, were now in custody, agents still needed one of them to talk about the murder.
We wanted to set it up to the point where David Fisher would be within view of the fact that Bobby Bryce Mulligan was being brought in. And we wanted him to know in no uncertain terms that we had him and we had the shooter, and hopefully to make him realize that he was had.
It didn't work. Fisher declined to be interviewed without an attorney being present. Agents secured a warrant to search the room that Fisher had been renting. Recorded in Fisher's diary, they found a series of cash payments to Mulligan. From a closet, they removed 2 strong boxes. Agents hoped that inside they would find the criminal evidence that could ensure Fisher's conviction. Agents obtained a search warrant and cut the locks.
Okay, our first item.
Inside the first box, they found documents that held David Wilkey's signature.
manila folder.
They were likely samples used by Fisher to falsify the insurance claim.
Signed and everything, partner.
But the evidence was only circumstantial.
This definitely is going to tie this in.
In the other, they found only personal effects, nothing of evidentiary value. It looked like agents would have little else to offer as evidence at trial. A few days later, Agent McDowell got a message that 22-year-old Bobby Mulligan wanted to meet. So far, both Mulligan and Fisher had remained quiet.
But after a couple days of thinking about it and in consultation with his parents, it was apparently Mr. Mulligan's decision that he wanted to come clean about his participation in this murder and felt that it was to his best benefit to be the first to come forward with a confession.
Start with,
Agents interviewed Mulligan at an office in the jail. He confirmed that David Wilkey's death was no accident.
When did you first get contacted by Fisher for this contract?
Mulligan said it all began with Fisher's plan to kill Wilkey's fiancée. Fisher had fronted Wilkey money to romance a young woman, kill her, then collect on her insurance.
Hey, David, I just want to say thanks.
But Wilkey fell in love and backed out.
Try to stay out of the way, okay? Thanks. It won't be that long.
Fisher was furious. To get the money back that he had invested in the teenager, Fisher recruited Mulligan to kill Wilkey for his insurance. Mulligan's story supported Stedham's. Agents finally had the corroborating evidence they'd been pursuing for over a year. Mulligan added that he had tried to call the whole thing off, but Fisher kept pressuring him to shoot Wilkey and get it over with. He said Fisher brought his ex-wife's son along as a decoy. Mulligan maintained that he actually did slip and fall.
I'm fine.
Mulligan claimed that he hadn't intended to kill Wilkey, only injure him. He said it was Fisher who actually murdered the kid.
He believed that it was the finger of David Fisher going into the wound that killed Wilkey, that his own gunshot didn't do it. So he believed that Fisher actually did this. But unfortunately, there was no way of being able to be able to determine that forensically, because Fisher convinced Wilkey's mother in a phone call at least 2 days after the incident happened that it was Wilkey's last request to be cremated.
What was the final contract amount?
He said Fisher had promised him $38,000 to pull the trigger, but ended up paying him only $7,000. David Fisher was tried for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and murder for hire. Fisher got the death penalty. Mulligan pled guilty to the same charges and was sentenced to life in prison.
I had been a law enforcement officer almost 13 years before I became an FBI agent. And the one thing I did realize from this case is that people can be extremely, extremely cold-blooded and evil, and that there is no remorse whatsoever in their souls, none. And that anytime you hear a story about something not being right, you have to listen to it. You have to listen to them and hear what they have to say, because you never know when something like that could be true.
11 years later, on March 25, 1999, David Lee Fisher was executed by lethal injection.
Fisher?
David Wilkey had considered Fisher his closest friend. But to David Lee Fisher, money was more important than friendship, or even life itself. On this day, a corpse would need to be transported, but this time, it would be Fisher's. In Minnesota, a gruesome murder left few clues behind. A local drug boss became a suspect. but he was well insulated against police. FBI agents and local detectives had to infiltrate a dangerous cartel.
Okay, go ahead.
To get to a pair of gangsters who killed with no remorse.
A burning body in a dark alley shed light on a cold-blooded killer. His partners in crime would tell the story if they lived. In the underworld of the drug trade, even a childhood friend can quickly become an enemy. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. A trail of drugs and money led FBI agents to a murderer who underestimated the power of forensic science.
June 24th, 1990. At about 3 a.m., a St. Paul, Minnesota resident was enjoying the quiet of a summer evening when he noticed a car drive into the alley behind his house. Moments later, he heard the distinct sound of a fire erupting, then the car speeding away. Checking the alley, he discovered a large object engulfed in flames. He feared the fire would ignite his property. He called 911. St. Paul emergency units responded. When firemen extinguished the flames, they realized it was more than an act of vandalism. The object was a charred human body wrapped in a melted plastic tarp. Homicide detectives arrived at the scene. They questioned the resident, but he hadn't seen the car or who was in it. Police found no identification on or near the body. Investigators hoped an autopsy would provide more information. If they could identify the victim, it might help lead them to those responsible. A medical examiner determined the victim was a black male in his mid-20s and that he was dead before the fire was set. Cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds to the head. The examiner extracted 3 small-caliber slugs. They would be sent to the ballistics lab for examination. Despite the fire damage, the examiner found powder burns on the victim's head, indicating he'd been shot at point-blank range. If enough of his fingerprints remained, they might help identify him. The prints were entered into the automatic fingerprint identification system. AFIS is a national database containing the prints of 23 million persons. The body had probably been burned to make identification difficult. With the AFIS technology, it might be possible. But running the prints would take some time. Police believed such a gruesome murder was probably drug-related. The Minneapolis-St. Paul area had recently become a popular import spot for narcotics. With the drugs came an increase in violent crime. Special Agent John Tyndall of Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigated drug running in the area.
The primary way that people moved cocaine into this state at that time would have been through public transportation, that being either by bus or by airplane.
Police created drug interdiction teams assigned to the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport to try to stop the influx. Agents monitored travel to and from cities like Miami and Los Angeles where the drugs originated. Their job was to spot drug traffickers among legitimate passengers. On June 25, 1990, the day after the body was recovered in the alley, agents were watching the counters where same-day tickets were issued.
These two guys approached the ticket agent and stood there for quite some time doing what we felt was negotiating the sale of some tickets. They pulled out a wad of cash. They paid cash for the tickets. They then left the ticket counter.
The agents would check at the counter and learn that the men were flying under the names Jeffrey English and Harry Babbs. Agents caught up with the men at their gate as they waited to board their flight. They asked if they would answer some questions.
We explained to them that they had no obligation to talk to us if they didn't want to. They weren't under arrest. They were free to leave.
Both men consented to be interviewed and said they were just heading back home to L.A. They said they had come to St. Paul to visit a friend named Ken Jones. The officers asked for permission to search the bags they'd checked at the counter. Both agreed, so a search warrant was unnecessary. The bags hadn't been loaded onto the aircraft yet. Inside the one belonging to Jeffrey English was a plastic bag containing rolls of cash totaling $13,000.
All right. Got it.
Tucked into a shoe was a .22 caliber Derringer pistol. It would have been easy to miss.
It was a tiny revolver, 5-round capacity, with a barrel that was only 1 inch long, and the entire gun was approximately 4 inches long, a gun that could be concealed simply by palming it in your hand.
In the other bag was another handgun. Neither had been declared. That violation, plus the suspicious amount of cash, provided enough probable cause for an arrest.
Officer Moss.
The officer radioed his partner.
Be aware they could be armed and dangerous.
They had to detain Babbs and English before they took off. The plane was still at the terminal. The agent boarded the plane and found the men already seated.
I just need to ask you a couple questions. It won't take long.
In a later interview, English would claim that the money was from selling a car. He said he bought the .22 Derringer on the street in Minneapolis.
And he went on to add that he had no idea where the gun had been. I thought that was a strange response for a person to back away from the gun's history. And that was the first inclination that either of us had that the gun might have been used in some type of crime, simply by the way he framed his response to the question.
Agents became more suspicious when English admitted he was flying under a false name. His real name was Jeffrey Barnes. There was no evidence against Barnes or his companion for anything but misdemeanor weapons violations. Both men paid fines and were released. Their guns were held until agents could check police records to see if they'd been used in earlier crimes. 2 weeks later, St. Paul police received the fingerprint comparison from the man found burned in the alley. There was a match from Southern California. The victim's name was Duan Walker. The 26-year-old Los Angeles area resident had a record for intent to sell narcotics. Walker's death made the papers in his hometown. His uncle read the article and called the St. Paul authorities.
Operator.
St. Paul Police, please.
He told detectives his nephew had gone there to meet a man named Ken Jones.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your information. We appreciate that.
Yes, officer, my name is...
When Walker didn't return from St. Paul, the uncle had contacted Jones, who said Walker had already left.
It's going to be a big help. All right. Bye-bye. I think I got the folder right here.
St. Paul narcotics detectives were familiar with Jones. They had been investigating him for years. He was reputed to be the largest supplier of cocaine in the region. Jones was careful with his drug business and well insulated against investigation.
Thanks, everyone. On behalf of the Neighborhood Development Board, we'd like to give a big round of applause.
By publicly donating to urban charities, Ken Jones also portrayed himself as a community benefactor. Police knew it was a cover. Like his legitimate businesses they believed he used to launder drug money. His reputation was different on the street. Among dealers and addicts, Jones was known to rule his interests with an iron fist. If he didn't get paid, people got hurt.
Hold on, I got your money. I got all your money.
For years, detectives had been searching for a way to shut the drug boss down. Detectives knew that murder victim Duan Walker was with Jones before his death. If they could prove the dealer was involved, they could finally take him off the street. But they needed more evidence. Investigators went to interview employees of Jones's business.
Hi, can I help you?
They hoped someone would know about Jones meeting Duan Walker.
Never seen him before.
Never seen this person at all?
But none of the employees were willing to talk. Drug boss Ken Jones continued his narcotics trafficking. He seemed to be beyond the reach of the law. On June 24, 1990, St. Paul authorities had found the body of 26-year-old Duan Walker burning in an alley. Just before his death, he had met with drug boss Ken Jones. Police believe Jones was involved in the murder. But witnesses wouldn't talk, and no physical evidence implicated him. Investigators got an unexpected break 3 months later when St. Paul police stopped a man for a routine traffic violation. A computer check revealed there was a warrant out for the arrest of Charles Shuck. Police took him into custody. They contacted the investigator who had issued the warrant, Special Agent John Tyndall of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
We'll get it straightened out.
The arrest warrant was issued for Charles Shuck for importing 2 kilos of cocaine. We attempted to find him at the address that he had given, and he wasn't there, and we had no way of knowing where he was at that time.
Several months earlier, a drug interdiction team at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport had spotted the courier. They watched Shuck pay cash for a full-fare, last-minute ticket to Los Angeles.
That would be one-way round trip.
Round trip.
Round trip.
Shuck didn't check a bag and carried only one onto the plane.
Boarding pass here.
The next day, agents saw him return, now with 2 bags. They knew couriers often had extra bags when returning from a drug pickup.
How you doing, sir? I'm Officer Moss. Officer Trimble.
They told Shuck that they could not arrest him, but they could hold his luggage for inspection. Authorities could not open his bags without his consent, and he did not give it.
You're not hiding anything, are you?
Shuck's response was not that of innocent travelers.
If you tell them that you're going to detain their bags, typically, if they have nothing to hide, they want to stay with their bags. They don't want to leave those bags behind. Shuck had none of that. He had no questions. He had no concerns. His primary concern was getting out of there just as fast as he could.
Take him with us. I'm sure.
Shortly after Shuck left, a canine unit examined the bags. One was clean, but in the other, the dog smelled narcotics.
You can't get a search warrant based strictly on the actions of the dog. The dog was an integral part of it in the request for the search warrant, but it wasn't the only part. We also had to detail the fact that we had seen Shuck the previous night come in and buy a high-dollar round-trip ticket to Los Angeles, with a return flight being the following morning. These things are unusual. The fact that he carried one small bag on the aircraft and carried two off is also unusual.
Agents secured a search warrant to open the bags. Inside, they recovered 2 kilos of cocaine. Investigators suspected Shuck was carrying the drugs for someone else.
At that time, we weren't able to make a connection as to who he might be working with or working for, but my gut feeling was that he was a courier for somebody at a higher level.
Now that he had been arrested, Shuck learned of the evidence against him. He had his attorney propose a deal. In exchange for sentencing consideration, he would give up information on the man he ran drugs for. More importantly, he would also provide details about the unsolved murder of Duane Walker. Shuck said that the man who employed him as a courier was the same man who had ordered the murder. The man's name was Ken Jones. For every kilo of cocaine delivered, Ken Jones would pay Shuck $1,000. Shuck had worked for the drug boss since high school. It was precisely because their relationship was so strong that Jones did not retaliate for the lost cocaine. But Shuck was not the only courier. Jones' girlfriend also played a major role in the trafficking organization.
Charles Shuck told me that she was intimately familiar with his drug dealing operation. In fact, she had been a stewardess for an airline for a lot of years and had acted as a courier for him, bringing in kilos when she was working as a stewardess.
Investigators asked Shuck if the girlfriend knew about the murder.
Basically, I was a courier.
He said that around the time Walker was killed, she had been very upset.
It was not mine, it was Ken Jones. Irene, are you okay?
She told him that Jones had ordered her to clean up the bathroom of his condo.
What's going on?
There was a great deal of blood by the bathtub.
By the way,
Shuck had heard Walker had been shot there. He said the killer's name was Jeffrey Barnes, an enforcer for Jones, and the same man whose suitcase held $13,000 in cash and a .22 Derringer pistol.
He felt that Barnes had shot the victim, Duane Walker, in the head, and that left town the following day after being paid by Ken Jones for that hit. Shuck alleged that the $13,000 cash that was found in the suitcase was at least part of the hit money that was paid to Barnes by Jones for doing the hit, and that the .22 caliber revolver that was found was the murder weapon.
Just know that it wasn't my cocaine. I was just
Shuck knew the caliber of the murder weapon and other details of the crime that hadn't been made public.
So we felt that there was some credibility on Chuck's part that Barnes and Jones could be considered as legitimate suspects in the murder of Walker.
Agents realized they might have the murder weapon already in custody.
Let's see what we got here.
If they could prove it was the gun that killed Duane Walker, they could move forward with the murder case on drug boss Ken Jones and his enforcer Jeffrey Barnes.
Let's take it.
They retrieved the .22 caliber Derringer from the evidence locker. Investigators sent the Derringer to the St. Paul Ballistics Lab for testing. Examiners compared grooved striations inside its barrel to the grooves on the slugs removed from the victim. But their report was disappointing.
The results were inconclusive, in part due to the fact that it only had a 1-inch barrel, and the opportunity to pick up striations from the lands and grooves within this barrel were limited. The longer the barrel, the better the opportunity to pick up the striations. A short barrel like this gives you very limited opportunity.
Without a forensic examination matching Barnes's gun to the bullets that killed Walker, authorities had only the word of a drug smuggler to bring to trial. Agents shipped the gun to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Lab in Washington, D.C.
The feeling was that their laboratory was somewhat more sophisticated. They were accustomed to doing things like that on a routine basis, and with their sophisticated equipment, they might be able to come up with a determination that was more specific. After it was examined by ATF, they came to the conclusion that it was, in fact, the weapon that was used to murder Duane Walker.
Investigators now knew that enforcer Jeffrey Barnes was in possession of the murder weapon the day after Walker was killed. But they still had no proof that he had fired the fatal shots or that Ken Jones had ordered the hit.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Agents and detectives sought witnesses who could connect the two men to the homicide.
Could you take a look at the picture?
Whether due to loyalty or fear, authorities were met with silence.
One after the other, the people we attempted to talk to would not talk to us, and they would not give up anything. So we were back to the point of having only the statement given to us by Charles Schuck and no palpable way of corroborating any of the information that he gave us through other witnesses.
Tim, got a minute?
Yeah, come in.
Investigators applied for a warrant to search Jones's condominium. But the judge refused to grant one because they couldn't corroborate the story of the blood on the floor.
Information from the pen registers all supports it.
After almost a year, investigators realized that the case would not be solved without additional resources. They contacted the St. Paul FBI's Drug Task Force for assistance. Having worked narcotics for 20 years, Sergeant Tom Donaski was well aware of the reputations of Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes.
Both of them were very intimidating and imposing individuals. They had a violent background, and when we'd go and interview people, everyone would pretty much try to avoid either having contact with us or they wouldn't tell us the straight story.
The task force believed that the only way to get to the drug boss and his enforcer would be through a cooperating witness. They needed to find someone who could give them first-hand information and perhaps solicit a taped confession.
He's a chump, man. I'm afraid of him. I got people on the street.
The investigator approached a confidential informant he had developed on earlier cases.
But if he to do something, I can have him.
The informant couldn't place Barnes with the victim,
He got a bad reputation. I'll take him down.
but he did know that the enforcer had a nephew who had recently been released from prison.
What's up, man? What's up, Clay? What's up, dude?
The nephew's name was Russell Barnes, known on the street as Ice.
Yeah, they moving
folks out next door.
After leaving prison, he had come to St. Paul to begin dealing cocaine with contacts provided by his uncle, Jeffrey Barnes. The nephew was anxious to make money. Agents hoped to use his eagerness to their advantage. Investigators developed a new strategy in the fall of 1992. The enforcer's nephew would become their new target. FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy, a specialist in wire intercepts, was called in as part of the plan.
We went after Russell, number one, because he was a pretty good-sized dope dealer. And number two, he dealt with his uncle, Jeffrey, and we felt that if we could get a case made against Russell, that would help us make a case against Jeffrey.
To get him, agents would somehow have to infiltrate the closed ranks of a dangerous drug underworld. In 1992, investigators believed a St. Paul drug boss and his enforcer had killed Duan Walker. They had already recovered the murder weapon. But Sergeant Tom Donaski, assigned to an FBI drug task force, needed corroborating evidence in order to arrest drug boss Ken Jones and his enforcer Jeffrey Barnes.
Just having the weapon alone wasn't enough to get him prosecuted for it. We felt that we're going to have to identify some people or bring some people into court that'll be able to testify that Jeff Barnes and Ken Jones were involved, in the murder.
FBI Special Agent Grant Beasy believed that if they first arrested the enforcer's nephew, drug dealer Russell Barnes, he might provide the information they needed.
We had sources of information that were close to Russell that gave us the indication that he knew that his uncle had committed the murder. We didn't know to what extent that Russell knew about it.
To build a narcotics case against Russell Barnes, the FBI enlisted a trusted informant with credibility on the street.
And I can hear what I'm saying coming back through here. All right.
Agents wired the informant, who would engage in controlled drug buys with the enforcer's nephew. Task force members would record each buy. It was a risky operation. If the informant's wire was discovered, he would likely be killed. Agents wanted to build trust and avoid any possibility that Russell Barnes might suspect it was a setup.
What's up, Ice? Hey, bro. Chillin', baby, chillin'. What you need? What you want? What you need? Okay, all right. You want taste?
At first, the informant bought small amounts. Over time, the transactions increased in size and frequency, and each was recorded.
Bags like this, right over top. That's a nice package. Everything's everything.
But Russell Barnes refused to speak about his knowledge of the murder.
Later.
Agents were no closer to solving the crime. The FBI needed to plant someone closer to the enforcer himself.
They did.
In May of 1993, they discovered their way in. An informant working for the St. Paul FBI on another case mentioned that he and Jeffrey Barnes had done time together. He claimed they were very close and that Barnes trusted him. He said he was sure he could get Barnes to sell him cocaine and to talk about the Duan Walker murder.
So, you know Barnes really well.
Agents tested the informant's credibility by having him call the enforcer. Within moments, it became clear Jeffrey Barnes was comfortable talking to the informant.
Nah, I've been out a couple of months now.
I'm still in the business. You know me.
It was the break investigators were looking for. Now they needed to find a place for the drug buys, a controlled environment that could be adequately wired.
I've been eating well.
At the time, the informant was living with a relative and couldn't really do things at his home. We obtained a house from HUD and moved the informant into the house. And the informant agreed to record certain conversations that he might have with Jeffrey Barnes.
Investigators set the informant up in a government-owned house on the west side of St. Paul. He was to contact the FBI anytime the enforcer was planning to visit the house for a drug deal. FBI technicians wired the house with electronic listening devices in 3 rooms. Agents knew Barnes liked to boast about being a hitman, referring to himself as Murder Incorporated.
With that information, we tried to encourage the informant to try to bring him to a point where he would talk to him about, you know, acts of violence that he was involved in and things like that. And this is something that Jeff Barnes' reputation was all about, and it's something that he liked to brag about.
Agents coached their informant on how to draw Barnes out about the murder of Duane Walker.
Thank you, thank you.
He was to lead the enforcer into talking about the hits he had performed in the past.
Well, look, I don't want to take too much of your time.
In one tape conversation, the informant pretended he wanted Barnes to help him rob a drug dealer.
Let me go up there and rough him up a little bit.
Jeffrey Barnes suggested that they just kill him.
Murder?
Been a hitman a long time.
Barnes
Nothing to it.
told the informant that doing a hit on somebody is not a problem, and he described how he could do it. He would walk up behind the individual, pop him in the head with a handgun, let him fall on the floor, wrap him in plastic, and drag his body outside and put it in an alley. And this was the exact same way that Duane Walker had been killed.
Look, don't want to take up too much of your time. Let's say we get down to business. Don't stay in business long.
It was good circumstantial evidence, but by itself, it wasn't enough.
Okay. I got your money.
Because the buys had been arranged by telephone, investigators secured a warrant to tap the suspect's phone lines. Although the wire intercepts captured no information on the Walker murder, they did produce details of the drug operation. In January 1994, the task force decided it was time to arrest Russell Barnes and hope he would turn on his uncle. On January 29th, they set up another controlled drug buy with an informant. It would happen at a downtown St. Paul hotel. Investigators wired the room for sound.
You can go.
Okay.
The reliability of the eavesdropping devices was essential.
Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2.
The recordings would be used in court. And agents would be monitoring from an adjacent room. If Russell Barnes discovered the setup, they would be able to protect their informant.
Okay, go ahead and give me a signal.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
When the room was ready, they would have the informant call the enforcer's nephew and order several ounces of cocaine.
Mary had a little lamb. Testing, 1. Mary had a little lamb.
Investigators from St. Paul Police Special Investigations Unit were conducting the surveillance at Russell Barnes' residence, and after the phone calls were made, with very short delay, Russell went to the hotel.
Russell Barnes had delivered to the informant before.
Glad to see you came around, boy. I told you one day we'd be rolling like this. See what you need tonight.
He brought cocaine and the equipment he needed for measuring it.
So you came correct. Well, I knew what I had to do.
He suspected nothing.
Big times, big times.
To him, it was just another deal.
2 keys, 2 keys.
He set up shop and began the transaction, unaware that every word was being recorded. It was important to get a drug dealer off the streets. But what agents really wanted was for Russell Barnes to give a statement about drug boss Ken Jones and enforcer Jeffrey Barnes committing murder.
You ready?
When details of the drug deal were on tape, investigators moved in.
Behind your head. Okay, we're clear.
They had indisputable evidence of Russell Barnes selling roughly 2 ounces of cocaine.
On your knees.
Investigators explained to him that as a 3-time narcotics offender, Russell was looking at a minimum of 15 years in prison. They wanted a statement about his uncle.
Right, Barnes.
We sat him down and we talked at some length about Jeffrey Barnes and his involvement with the Dwan Walker homicide. Being somewhat reluctant because this was his uncle, it took some persuasion, and after a while we gained his confidence, and he eventually told us his knowledge about the Dwan Walker homicide.
What happened with Walker? Walker.
Jeffrey Barnes had told him Walker tried to steal cocaine from Ken Jones.
Took my gun, I put it to his
So they
head.
killed him.
Pow!
The enforcer said they then dumped Walker's body in an alley, doused it with gasoline, and lit it afire.
Nobody messes with my money.
It was, at best, a second-hand confession.
Nobody messes with my drug operation. And
Russell
also
Barnes was taken into
murder of that
custody.
boy, Dwan Walker.
All right, let's go. Stand up.
Agents also arrested their informant, so no one would know he cooperated.
Discovered a 22 caliber. Sounds like the one I'm working on. Record.
Drug boss Ken Jones was still on the street, as was his enforcer, Jeffrey Barnes.
Just pop 'em.
But the FBI task force was closing in.
Nothing to it.
By 1994, while trying to dismantle a Minnesota drug ring and solve a 4-year-old murder, the FBI and St. Paul police had arrested dealer Russell Barnes, who agreed to cooperate. He offered details on the crimes committed by his uncle Jeffrey Barnes, including nationwide drug trafficking and the 1990 murder of Dwan Walker. According to Sergeant Tom Donaski, investigators had plenty of evidence against Jeffrey Barnes, a known enforcer for drug boss Ken Jones.
We've got a weapon that's been recovered at the airport. We've got Jeff Barnes making a comment to one of our informants that this is how you murder somebody. That's a dope ripoff type of situation. And the actual procedure that he went through when he killed Dwan Walker, and now we have his nephew telling us that he's been at his house, blood relative, that we're going to have testify in court that he actually told him about the murder.
In August 1994, investigators staked out the apartment where Jeffrey Barnes was staying. They knew the enforcer was often armed and willing to kill. He had no time to react.
Freeze! Please up! Put your hands up on the car. Come on, move! Move! Put your hands
Prosecutors did not yet charge him with murder.
Got it?
They went forward with a drug conspiracy case instead.
Let me have your other hand. Right.
Dealing drugs to his ex-cellmate earned Barnes 30 years in prison. They would hold the murder case until they had more evidence against him and Ken Jones. Special Agent Grant Beasy believed having Barnes in prison would make witnesses more willing to talk.
Jeff Barnes had the reputation of being an enforcer. He scared people. We felt that getting him off the street would take away the intimidation factor against some of these other people. And it would be better for us to be able to talk to these other folks with him being locked up.
The plan worked. After Barnes's arrest, investigators met with an associate of Ken Jones. Facing a long prison term on drug charges, he offered to be a government witness. He said he had extensive knowledge about Jones's drug cartel and that he had met Duane Walker just before his murder. In mid-June 1990, Jones had ordered the cooperating witness to drive a pickup truck to St. Louis, where he was to meet Walker. The truck had been fitted with a second fuel tank. Upon arrival in St. Louis, Duane Walker stuffed several bags of cocaine into the false tank. When full, the tank held about 30 kilos of the drug. That amount of cocaine would have been worth more than $1 million. The cooperating witness then drove the truck back to St. Paul, where he turned it over to the drug boss. Walker had arrived earlier and was staying with Jones at his condominium. Jones hadn't paid Walker for the drugs yet. In fact, he and his enforcer decided not to.
The two of them conspire to take the dope and to eliminate the problem and just execute Duane Walker.
That's Bo.
The witness's testimony would explain the motive for the killing. He told the agents that several days later he got a call from the drug boss. He was ordered to come over to the condo immediately. It was Sunday morning, June 24th, 1990, the day following Duane Walker's murder. Ken Jones seemed very nervous. He ordered the cooperating witness to get rid of the truck he had driven up from St. Louis, the one with the false gas tank. The drug boss demanded that no one be told about the cocaine run. The witness said Jones's girlfriend had also told him about cleaning up blood in the bathroom after the murder.
This picture, you recognize this chick? Do you swear to tell the truth?
In the summer of 1995, prosecutors convened a grand jury to secure witness testimony under oath. Jones's girlfriend was subpoenaed to testify.
That would be Irene, the sister of Charles.
But she denied telling anyone that she cleaned up blood in Jones's
I'm not
bathroom.
sure what you're talking about. I never cleaned up any blood.
The Ken Jones.
If authorities couldn't prove she was lying, they might never be able to indict Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes for murder.
No, sir.
I wonder if you would tell us, please, about the evening.
In June 1995, grand jury testimony from others proved that one witness perjured herself when she denied cleaning up blood in the bathroom of drug boss Ken Jones.
Ken Jones, did you not?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, sir.
On June 21st, the grand jury indicted Jones and his main enforcer Jeffrey Barnes for the 1990 murder of Duane Walker. Barnes, the alleged hitman, was already in prison on drug charges. The day after the indictment, investigators staked out the home of drug boss Ken Jones. Although he had insulated himself well against the investigation, Ken Jones was finally arrested for murder.
Cover.
FBI Drug Task Force member Sergeant Tom Danaski was determined to find physical evidence to back up witness testimony at the trial.
through the investigation, everything focused on the fact that Dewan Walker was murdered in the bathroom, and he was shot in the head there. I was thinking that we might be able to still find a trace of blood in the grouting on the floor in the bathroom.
Bureau of Criminal Apprehension technicians processed the bathroom. After Jones was arrested, new tenants had moved into the condo. They gave their consent for the search. The technicians tested for the presence of blood using luminol, a relatively new technique at the time. Luminol reacts with proteins in blood, rendering minute traces of it visible under ultraviolet light.
We were able to determine on the underlayment underneath the tile that there was a significant amount of blood. They were unable to obtain a DNA off that test, but they were able to obtain a test that showed that it was a significant amount of blood, and it was human blood that was still traceable back even 5 years.
Mr. Barnes and Mr. Jones.
It was the evidence investigators needed.
Are, in fact, the head of
On October 31st, 1995, Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes went to trial in St. Paul.
every year, but also for the murder of Dewan.
Prosecutors outlined what they believed occurred in Dewan Walker's final
These two
hours.
gentlemen here are responsible for all of this.
Walker had delivered roughly 30 kilos of cocaine to Jones. The drug boss decided he didn't want to pay. That night, he and his main enforcer, Jeffrey Barnes, partied with Walker. Eventually, Walker headed into the bathroom. Jones and Barnes had planned the hit to take place there. Dewan Walker was unarmed. Barnes fired 3 shots from his .22 caliber Derringer. As always, Jones maintained his distance. Walker died immediately. Later that night, they wrapped Walker's body in plastic sheets to contain the blood and loaded it into a car. They drove to an alley and dumped the body. To make identification more difficult, they doused the body with gasoline and set it ablaze. Jones used his girlfriend to cover his tracks after the murder. The bathroom floor was covered with blood, particularly the area around the tub where Walker had fallen. She was able to clean the surface, but blood had seeped down into the subflooring. 5 years later, technicians would find it there.
You will come away with the inescapable conclusion.
Ken Jones and Jeffrey Barnes were convicted of murder and drug charges.
Responsible for this murder. There has been
In
no
March
evidence
1996, they were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of
the
parole.
associations of these gentlemen through the years.
Jeffrey Barnes, who had once boasted he was Murder Incorporated, was no longer a threat to those outside the prison system. Ken Jones had tried to create an image of himself as a community leader. But his greed led to murder, and he will never leave prison alive. At a bank outside Los Angeles, a nighttime explosion that no one hears. Cunning criminals no one sees. It's the perfect burglary in which cash and bandits vanish without a trace. With little to go on, the FBI must use instinct and determination to solve a case that seems impossible to crack.
Bank robbery is a brazen yet simple crime. A mask, a gun, a note passed to a teller. But bank burglary is different. It takes skill to disable an alarm, to penetrate a locked vault. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In 1972, the largest bank burglary in U.S. history went down without a hitch. $8 million gone. Now agents must track a gang of sophisticated criminals with enough money to disappear forever.
Laguna Niguel, California, March 27, 1972. It's Monday morning at the United California Bank. Employees prepare to open for business. When the bank manager tries to unlock the vault door, it won't open.
Somebody call the safe company.
A technician from the vault manufacturer arrives 20 minutes later to check the door's locking system. He works for hours. The combination is right, the tumblers are in place, but unexplainably, even the expert can't get it open.
It's not working.
Looking for another way in, the technician climbs into the rafters above the vault. He is stunned to find a hole cut in the roof. Below, a second gaping hole leading to the vault. Agents from the FBI Santa Ana resident agency immediately respond to the bank. The first investigator to survey the cluttered crime scene is Special Agent Jim Conway.
Upon arriving and getting up on the vault and looking down at this hole, we could see a pile of rubble, I would say 6 feet tall and expanding out.
Once inside the vault, the technician discovers a screwdriver jammed into the lock's gears. Agents suspect the thieves wanted to delay the discovery of the crime. The place is a disaster.
My first impression was there was going to be a lot of time and effort needed to work this out. It was something we couldn't just plow into because we had a crime scene. We were able to walk in, a few of us, and look around and see what the extent was as best we could determine. But we're walking over watches and rings and valuables and everything else because it was all piled into this big cement mess.
Special Agent Frank Calley begins sorting through the chaos.
Just everything was thrown all over the place. There, the locks of hair, all kinds of check statements, photographs, things that people would normally put in a safety deposit box. I remember seeing urns with ashes of deceased people in there.
The agents begin the arduous task of determining how the burglars entered the seemingly impenetrable vault. They notice dark soil and pieces of burlap mixed with the cement rubble. Outside, they find the bank's audible alarm disabled. They also find a ladder. Interpreting the clues, investigators piece together the burglars' intricate plan to breach the vault. They They disabled the alarm by injecting it with liquid styrofoam. It hardened, freezing the clapper in place and rendering the alarm useless. Then the burglars climbed onto the roof. Investigators find tape on a rooftop outlet, suggesting the burglars used the bank's electricity. When agents cannot find fingerprints on the tape, they conclude the burglars wore gloves. Fully powered, the burglars sawed a 4-foot opening into the roof.
Good, good. All right, we're in, we're in.
Once inside the rafters, they clearly knew how to bypass the interior silent alarm system.
They took a couple of the wires and that would have normally transmitted the alarm signal, and they clipped them both and soldered them together.
It was delicate, highly skilled work.
Knew right away they were smart. They did the homework.
Even with the alarm disabled, 16 inches of steel-reinforced concrete stood between the burglars and the contents of the vault. The only way through, an intensely powerful blast. Agents believe the bandits drilled holes into the cement, then inserted dynamite and electric blasting caps. The blast had to be precisely directed to blow through the cement without injuring the burglars or attracting attention. Agents conclude that the burlap fragments in the soil in the vault indicate that the burglars came prepared.
They placed the burlap bags over the explosive, not only to muffle the sound, but also it would direct the charge into the vault itself and keep the charge going into the concrete where they wanted it rather than coming back out where they were.
The investigators discover burn marks on the steel rebar that reinforces the cement. They conclude that the burglars knew the blast could not crack steel and came prepared with an acetylene torch. Agents turn their attention to assessing the total loss. Bank officials report $50,000 is missing from cash drawers. But the thieves were not content with the cash. They took the time to break into 458 safe deposit boxes. Investigators find tool marks on the locks of the boxes and deduce the burglars used a pointed instrument and a lot of brute force to break them open one by one. They carefully sorted through every item, leaving behind what they didn't want. Amazingly, the bandits were so methodical that they got in and out without being seen or heard. In 1972, most banks were closed on weekends. Agents conclude that the suspects took full advantage of that fact.
Apparently they had been in there several times, in and out over the weekend. They probably went in on Friday night, and they probably didn't get out till late Sunday night.
Not only had the burglars pulled off such a lengthy, complex crime, they did it without leaving a single fingerprint. Although investigators do find a brown cotton glove and broken drill bits, neither is unique enough to be traceable. Agents and deputies collect the debris for further examination at the crime lab. But with no apparent evidence and no witnesses, agents are facing the tough challenge of identifying and locating a group of highly skilled criminals, including electronics and explosives experts. Investigators turn their attention to determining the total loss from the safe deposit boxes. It will be extremely difficult since banks do not keep records of their contents.
Ordinarily, if you had a bank burglary, you would be missing cash. You'd go out and say, yes, we got to find $350,000 worth of cash. At this point, we did not know what was gone. It's a very affluent area. And so the possibilities of a tremendous amount of money and material being lost was evident.
Investigators begin the arduous task of carefully sorting and cataloging every item left in the vault. Then, by interviewing every box holder, agents learn the details of missing jewelry, rare gold coins, and bearer bonds. By a process of elimination, they slowly create a list of the stolen goods. The bank's loss of $50,000 in cash pales by comparison, as the value of the missing items rises to over $8 million. The heist has now become the largest bank burglary in U.S. history. With no physical evidence to go on, investigators hope to develop leads by thinking like the bandits.
We felt that they would need oxygen to burn the rebar, and so we canvassed hospitals, oxygen supply places, and things like that.
Despite checking every oxygen supplier in the area, agents come up with nothing.
We also felt that a drill of some type had to be used, obviously a large one, so we canvassed places to find if anybody had sold or rented a large drill, as we felt it would have to be used.
Again, agents go to dozens of equipment shops, checking records during the time surrounding the break-in. But they find no suspicious purchases or rentals.
Or the day before.
Clearly, the criminals in this case have masterminded and pulled off a nearly perfect heist. With no witnesses, no direct clues, and certainly no suspects, it seems impossible to solve. But the FBI is determined to identify the burglars and find them wherever they are. In March 1972, a professional crew of burglars blasted their way into a bank vault in Laguna Niguel, California, near Los Angeles. Over a weekend, they emptied hundreds of safe deposit boxes, made off with more than $8 million in cash and valuables, then disappeared without a trace. Agents believe they are an experienced band of criminals. The case is difficult to crack for the small Santa Ana FBI office. Needing more resources, they seek the help of the larger Los Angeles FBI field office. Special Agent Paul Chamberlain supervises the investigation.
At the time, it was our conclusion that this was the largest bank burglary in the history of the United States. We went to just about everyone in the office. It was several hundred agents, and that's not a typical response, but it became apparent that the crime was a significant crime.
The Santa Ana agents quickly briefed the Los Angeles office on the details.
We'd not had a bank burglary like that in recorded history in the Los Angeles division. Burglaries that did occur with banks involved a small effort, and this was a systematic, big-time operation that lasted over 3 days.
Since the burglars seem to be highly skilled professionals, yet have not struck Los Angeles before, agents conclude that they're probably from out of town. An agent sends a teletype to all other FBI offices, asking if anyone knows of similar bank burglaries. They get a hit from the Cleveland, Ohio field office, where agents have been investigating similar bank heists, 13 of them, in fact. The description of the California burglary immediately strikes a chord with them, including Special Agent Buddy Nix.
We knew from the modus operandi, the MO, the outside alarm had styrofoam spray placed in it to keep the audible alarm from activating, the fact that it was a roof job, the fact that the alarm system had been bypassed were all indications that bank burglary crews in Youngstown very well may have been involved.
The Ohio agents believe the 13 Ohio bank heists were committed by the Youngstown Erie Bank Burglary Group, a loose association of criminals tied to organized crime. The California agents were right. These are no small-time crooks.
Youngstown at that time was just a mecca for organized crime activities. I mean, they controlled the illegal gambling businesses, and they were, very much involved in interstate transportation of stolen property and tractor-trailer thefts, and there were burglary crews that were operating. And there were a lot of very sophisticated burglaries that were taking place at that time.
As part of earlier investigations, the Youngstown, Ohio agents have identified nearly 100 men believed to be part of the burglary group. They've collected intelligence on each of them. Agents send the men's names and mugshots to the Los Angeles FBI. There, investigators try to narrow the list. Since the criminals must have traveled to California, agents check airline passenger manifests from around the time of the burglary. Without the benefit of modern computers, it is a time-consuming process done by hand. After an exhaustive search, they find the names of 5 men from the Youngstown list who had boarded a recent flight to Los Angeles.
That's great.
Emil Dinzio, Harry Barber, Charles Mulligan, Charles Brockles, and Philip Christopher arrived in California 9 days before the heist. The 6th man, James Dinzio, came in on a different flight the day before the burglary. Finally, agents have developed suspects.
Dinzio and his brother, Emil Dinzio.
Agents review the intelligence gathered on the 6 members of the burglary group. All have long records for home and small business burglaries,
First suspect we're going to look
and
at
have done
today,
little jail time.
Emil. So if we get him,
Emil Dinzio appears to be the brains of the gang, the leader.
you need to pay attention to that picture and remember his face.
He plans the jobs and handpicks the team to pull them off.
This is Charles Brockles. This guy has a
Charles
history of,
Brockles is an explosives and electronics expert, well-versed in bank alarms. Agents believe Philip Christopher is a lookout for the gang.
He's known for his expertise in bank robbing.
The other gang members are all relatives of the leader and probably help with the grunt work. There's Emil's older brother, James.
His face only a mother could love.
And Charles Mulligan, Emil's brother-in-law.
Here, you're gonna really appreciate this guy. Yeah,
There's also Emil's nephew, Harry Barber.
Okay. Why don't you take a look at this guy?
The men are all seasoned professional criminals, well-connected in organized crime. The Youngstown, Ohio FBI has linked them circumstantially to many bank burglaries, but never had direct evidence.
He's
The
a
charges
nobody.
never stuck.
He's a nobody, not a heavyweight, but we gotta...
The only information that links the suspects to the crime is that they were all in Los Angeles at the time of the burglary. Agents begin the difficult job of tracking their movements, starting at the airport.
We then canvassed and interviewed every cab driver at LAX that was working that day. That was a massive project.
If I showed you a couple pictures.
Agents spend days interviewing dozens of drivers. It finally pays off. One cab driver recalls taking a group of 5 men to a home in the nearby community of Southgate. He remembers the trip well.
The cab driver specifically remembered these folks for two reasons. One, because of the $100 tip, but for the other reason, they were tough, mean-looking guys.
Agents get the address from taxi records and decide to go there. But it is a risk. Agents fear that if the suspects find out they're investigating the burglary, they might skip town. They have to take the chance. It is their only lead, according to Special Agent Jim Conway.
But we had to interview somebody. We had to get our investigation started, and we were concerned that naturally that the rest of them would be aware that we were at least that close to identifying them.
Agents learn that the Southgate house belongs to the Barber family.
I don't have any idea.
Ronald Barber, the brother of suspect Harry Barber, agrees to an interview but is elusive.
We did not have a warrant or anything at that particular time. We had nothing positively to tie him to it. But the more he talked, the more he seemed to know, and the more we were impressed that he knows a whole lot.
Ronald Barber claims the 6 men were never at his house. Agents still have no direct evidence. Yet they believe Barber's story may be at least partially true. They note that the house seems too small to accommodate Ronald and 6 other men staying there. Agents conclude that at least some of them likely stayed elsewhere. So agents spread out, checking one hotel after another, starting with those closest to the bank. Special Agent Frank Calley.
We figured these fellows were high rollers. They knew they were going to get a big haul, so they were going to stay at a nice place. So we were knocking on the doors of every fine hotel in the LA, Orange County area.
It is more tedious, time-consuming footwork, but they do not give up.
Sir, I'm with the FBI.
On a hunch, one agent decides to take a different approach.
There was an agent who figured that maybe they didn't stay at the best hotels, and he took it upon himself to walk into a truck stop hotel. And lo and behold, he found out that Emil Denzio had stayed there.
You're sure? You're positive.
Emil Denzio is the leader of the burglary group.
But they would have been together, all 5.
Records show his brother-in-law, Charles Mulligan, also rented a room there around the time of the heist. Agents check Mulligan's registration card and find a license plate number.
It's Denzio.
They trace it to the Southgate address of Ronald Barber. Investigators now have 7 suspects, the 6 from Ohio and the local Ronald Barber. They still have nothing directly linking the men to the crime. But the investigation is finally rolling forward, and the FBI is closing in. Weeks after a well-planned multi-million-dollar bank burglary in Southern California, the FBI identifies 7 suspects. Ringleader Emil Denzio and his brother James Denzio, Charles Mulligan, Philip Christopher, and Charles Brockles, and Harry Barber and his brother Ronald Barber. A notorious gang of professional thieves based in Youngstown, Ohio. Agents determine at least 2 of the men stayed at an area motel days before the heist.
Okay.
Special Agent Paul Chamberlain is convinced the men are responsible, but he has no evidence to prove it.
By reference and innuendo, you kind of knew who was involved, but you need to have the evidence in federal court.
Agents subpoena the motel phone records and find a series of calls to a local man named Earl Dawson.
Our background investigation concluded he was a former military, a Marine guy with some training in munitions, explosives. And inasmuch as we had major explosions that occurred at the bank, it became interesting to us.
Special Agent Frank Calley learns of another interesting connection.
Yeah, we're going to be down on...
Dawson is from Youngstown, Ohio, the base of operations for the burglary group.
So there's the light goes off again, And we say, well, now we got another break. We got the connection somehow between the boys from Youngstown, the Dincios, and their cohorts in Dawson.
The agents decide to approach Dawson at his house to convince him he should cooperate. They show him pictures of Emil Dincio and his associates and ask if he knows them. Dawson is reluctant to talk.
I was in the Corps as well.
Knowing Dawson is a former Marine, Special Agent Callie appeals to his sense of duty.
Earl was a very patriotic individual, and I'm a former Marine, and we just kind of played that. I said, come on, Earl, you know, you're a former Marine, you've served your country. I said, what's important, Earl? It's a big case. And he said, what is it? I said, heard about that bank burglary down in Laguna Niguel?
Callie's tactic works. Dawson comes clean. He admits knowing 3 of the suspects: Emil Dincio, Emil's brother James, and Charles Mulligan. He and Mulligan are old friends who grew up together in Youngstown. Dawson tells Callie that the day before the Laguna Niguel heist, Mulligan came to his house with the other suspects. Mulligan gave him $100 to leave the house for a few hours so they could hold a meeting. Dawson left without hearing what they discussed.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
But Dawson adds that he does have something the agents might want to see.
He shows up the other day.
Mulligan left a car in his garage. It's still there. It is a huge break. Perhaps the car holds the evidence they've been looking for. But before they can check it out, they're interrupted.
While I'm talking to him, the phone rings. He answers the phone and he picks it up and he points to the phone and he mouths the word Mulligan.
Thinking quickly, Agent Callie asks Dawson's permission to eavesdrop, a legal requirement for using what he hears in court. Dawson signals that there is another phone in the bedroom.
Mulligan comes out and he says, hey, has anybody at the FBI been around? Dawson says, no, they're not around. I think I've almost had to laugh myself at the time listening to this. He's playing a beautiful role out there. He's really flip-flop. He's on our side now.
Mulligan explains that he knows the FBI has been asking questions about him and his cohorts, and that they're getting worried. And he's heading back to the Los Angeles area.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Mulligan said, I want to come out tonight and to see us. I'm going to move the car in the garage.
Agent Callie seizes the opportunity to trap Mulligan. But he fears that he might be setting up Dawson
Yeah, that'd be great.
and the FBI.
Didn't know for sure this officer, he could be sitting across the street at the time watching us, for all we know, with our FBI car sitting out front.
Callie instructs Dawson to arrange a meeting with Mulligan in a public place. Dawson tells Mulligan to meet him at his favorite bar, the Walnut Room. Mulligan agrees. Now agents have a chance to inspect the car Mulligan left in the garage. But it does not belong to Dawson, so he cannot give them permission to search it. Through the window, they can see a pair of brown cotton gloves, exactly like the one found in the vault. The back seat is covered in what appears to be cement dust, similar to the debris found at the crime scene. It is the probable cause agents need to obtain a search warrant for the car. They also obtain an arrest warrant for Charles Mulligan and set up surveillance at the Walnut Room. Plainclothes agents position themselves inside the bar, not far from Dawson.
We staked it out, so to speak. Four of us were inside waiting, and we had a couple of men outside waiting for him to arrive.
Dawson introduces Agent Callie to some regulars as a buddy from the Marine Corps. The agents have to look natural while staying sharp. Earl Dawson's safety is their primary concern.
We didn't know what was going to happen, so we had to protect Earl.
Agents devise a method for Callie and Dawson to communicate. Either one of them can signal the other by simply going to the restroom where they will meet. 3 hours later, Mulligan finally arrives. He appears to be alone and greets his old friend, who tries to get him to talk about the heist.
I didn't want to be too close. I was across the bar from him. Earl was talking to him and asking him something about, you were involved in that deal down in Laguna Niguel. And old Mulligan said, well, what do you think?
Unable to hear everything they're saying, Callie heads to the restroom. Dawson follows. In the men's room, Callie asks for an update. Dawson explains that Mulligan is anxious to leave and to pick up the car from Dawson's garage.
No problem. Okay.
Callie tells him to go, but instructs Dawson not to get into Mulligan's vehicle.
Whatever you do, don't get inside that car. Okay, don't get in the car.
What Callie doesn't tell him is that agents are in the parking lot, poised to capture Mulligan. Agents finally make the first arrest in the case. As they take Mulligan into custody, they pretend to arrest Dawson as well to mask his involvement with authorities. Mulligan is charged with bank burglary. He does not resist arrest. But when agents try to question him, he refuses to talk. They hope to find answers in the car he was trying to pick up. Agents return to Dawson's house and search the car in the garage.
We found this large motor used as a drill and some other tools that we felt were very much probably the ones that were used in the actual committing of the crime.
Agents recover stolen coins, along with drill bits, acetylene torches, hammers, and other items that could have been used for the Laguna Niguel heist.
Exactly.
And we felt very good about it. Felt we hit pay dirt, we hit a home run.
Evidence technicians ship everything to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. for processing. As examiners take days to analyze the evidence, field agents follow up on more phone records from the motel. One number belongs to a real estate agency in Laguna Niguel, California. A manager shows agents a condo she rented to suspects Ronald and Harry Barber days before the burglary. The Barbers told her they planned to stay 3 months, but left after only 3 weeks.
No damage, no problems.
She was able to put the day that they got there and the day they left together for us.
We used to run it to Ronald Barber.
The men moved out suddenly on March 27th, the day the crime was discovered.
We rented it for 3 months.
The manager gives investigators permission to search the condo, which is within sight of the targeted bank. Agents begin processing the condo for evidence, but initially find nothing.
The entire inside had been wiped clean with some kind of a product.
It seems the suspects were as meticulous there as they had been during the burglary.
There was no evidence recovered at the bank of any value, and therefore it was not surprising to see a place that had been wiped down. It appears as if they had done everything to ensure there was no evidence. They'd done just about everything right.
But in fact, they made one crucial mistake.
One of the evidence persons went to the dishwasher and opened the dishwasher and realized that it was loaded with dirty dishes and that someone had neglected to push the on button.
The dirty dishes are covered with multiple latent fingerprints. At the FBI lab, examiners recover the prints from the dishes and from the tools agents found in Mulligan's car and match them to 5 of the 7 suspects. Toolmark experts examine the damage on the safe deposit boxes and compare them to the striking point of a snout-nosed hammer from Mulligan's trunk. They report another match. The FBI's case is gaining momentum with good circumstantial evidence and one suspect in custody.
All right.
Now agents must find the other 6 and enough evidence to put them away for good. In Southern California, the FBI connects a team of 7 members of an organized crime ring based in Youngstown, Ohio, to a multi-million-dollar bank burglary when they recover tools used in the heist from the car of suspect Charles Mulligan. Mulligan's arrest puts the investigation into high gear, according to Special Agent Paul Chamberlain.
We did realize that with the arrest of Mulligan, eventually, and shortly thereafter, they were going to figure out that we had figured who this group was. And therefore, we heightened our investigation. We did everything as fast as we possibly could.
But since most of the evidence is circumstantial, the case hinges on the testimony of informant Earl Dawson, a man the FBI must protect.
Go ahead and leave with him, all right? But whatever you do, whatever happens.
Earl was probably the key witness because the case was kind of dry all along. It's physical evidence. Burglaries are very dry. Earl was able to put all the principals together. They were charged with conspiracy and burglary, and they could put them all together at his house.
Dawson begins receiving threatening phone calls, pressuring him to keep quiet. The caller insists on a face-to-face meeting to discuss the matter. But the FBI learns the meeting may have a more sinister purpose.
We received informant information that a contract was put out on Earl Dawson's life. They were going to come out and attempt to kill Dawson.
Agents instruct Dawson to arrange a meeting at his favorite bar, the Walnut Room. But don't tell him about the planned hit. Agents want to confront the men to send a message to the Youngstown crime ring that the FBI is on to them. Agents are confident that they can protect Dawson as long as he stays in a public place.
I told him, Earl, don't leave this bar. Whatever you do, don't go any place with this. You don't ever leave that room. You stay right in that bar.
As before, if either Dawson or Callie needs to communicate, they will meet in the restroom. The alleged hitmen arrive.
I started buying Earl some pretty heavy drinks. Earl was basically a beer drinker, but you could see they were trying to switch him up to stronger drinks.
When Dawson starts to look concerned, Callie heads to the restroom.
Come on, hurry up. Get him right out of here.
Dawson tells the agent he's scared. The hitmen want him to leave with them.
I said, Earl, you're not leaving this place with him. You're leaving, you're not leaving.
Agent Callie tells Dawson to wait in the restroom.
Listen, stay right here, and I'll be right back to get you.
All right,
Just stay right here.
Okay, hurry up.
The agents finally approach the men. They say they know what they came to do.
It's time to get out.
Let's go.
To the hitmen, the message is clear. Stay away from Dawson.
They had no problem leaving. I went directly to LAX, where they were escorted by LA's finest to an aircraft, and they left Southern California.
To keep Earl Dawson safe for good, the FBI decides to put him in the witness protection program.
You're gone. You're not going to see.
Agents then go after the remaining burglary suspects. Investigators secure warrants to search their last known addresses. At one house, agents get their first direct link to the burglary. Inside a woman's purse, they find a new $20 bill. They compare it to the list of serial numbers of sequence bills taken from the bank. It's a match. Special Agent Buddy Nix at the Youngstown FBI office receives information from an informant indicating that these gang members had been known to bury the cash they stole until they could launder it safely.
We identified about a 20 or 25 acre field that we had information that some of the loot was buried in. We dug in that field for days on end, and using picks and shovels and probes, and we finally rented a bulldozer.
The land is adjacent to property owned by James Dincio. After more than a week of digging,
Hey!
agents hit the jackpot. They unearthed several footlockers filled with millions of dollars in cash and bonds that they're able to trace back to the Laguna Niguel bank burglary. Agents then get yet another tip. A neighbor of gang leader Emil Dincio calls police.
A lot of money in there.
He reports finding a cooler buried in his yard. It is filled with nearly $100,000.
Right over there, Mr. Dincio.
Investigators match their serial numbers to those taken from the bank and recover Emil Dincio's prints from the cooler. With more direct evidence against the gang, agents begin making arrests. They first go to Ronald Barber's Southgate, California home. They are armed with search warrants. The only person they find is Ronald's mother. The brothers have disappeared.
No, I don't. I haven't seen him in a
All 6 remaining suspects are still at large. 3 months after a multi-million-dollar bank burglary, the FBI has solid evidence against 7 members of an organized crime ring. With only one suspect in custody, Charles Mulligan, they set out to arrest the others. Emil Dincio, James Dincio, Charles Brockles, Philip Christopher, Harry Barber, and Ronald Barber. Agents go to Emil Dincio's home near Youngstown, Ohio, and discover he's made no attempt to run.
Because of his attitude and his air of arrogance, Mr. Dincio actually believed he was above the law and was the kind of guy that could make things happen his way.
When agents arrest Dincio, he is carrying $537 in cash stolen from the Laguna Niguel bank.
Come on, we'll call it.
Other gang members are also surprisingly easy to find. Within days, authorities arrest Emil's brother, James Dincio, at an Ohio airport. His carry-on luggage is full of more money from the heist. Agents make their 4th arrest, nabbing Phil Christopher. In his apartment, they discover over $32,000 in stolen cash hidden in his closet. The 3 men arrogantly maintain their innocence and refuse to cooperate.
I got a deal right here.
2 months later, agents nab alarm expert Charles Brockles and get a break. They decide to confront him with what evidence they have and explain they can put him away for decades. They offer him a deal. In exchange for his full cooperation in outlining the burglary group and their crimes, prosecutors will drop all charges against Brockles and place him in the witness protection program. He agrees. Authorities have captured 5 of the 7 suspects. Everyone except the Barber brothers. Authorities extradite them to California and indict them on charges of conspiracy, burglary, and larceny of a federally insured bank. While in jail, Emil Dincio brags about the heist to another inmate and asks for his help in beating the charges.
Mr. Dincio confided in him a great many details that were not in his best interest to confide. He got this other inmate to help him buy an alibi for the time of the bank burglary.
But Dincio has chosen the wrong accomplice.
The other inmate was someone who had had contact with law enforcement on many occasions in the past, and he realized that what he was being told would be of some importance to someone, and he came to us.
Hoping to receive a lenient sentence for his own burglary case, the inmate tells agents of Dincio's confession and the plan to purchase an alibi.
And that was Vegas? Vegas? Well, that's where his alibi is.
The alibi was that Mr. Dincio was going to be in a motel room, a hotel room in Las Vegas with a prostitute and with physical evidence that would show that he was there.
The FBI sets up a sting. Agents give the inmate a contact to offer Dincio. The contact is actually an undercover agent who will provide Dincio's alibi materials. Dincio takes the bait. At the jail's visitation room, he meets the undercover agent who plays the role of a fixer, a criminal expert in solving problems.
Mr. Dincio received what he asked for. He got a registration card, which he registered in on. He put his fingerprint on it. He got a listing of shows, and he got the name of a prostitute who he was with, and that became part of his subsequent defense.
In October 1972, the trials begin in Los Angeles. Emil Dincio offers his false alibi, but the FBI's undercover fixer testifies about the sting. The jury convicts Dincio and the other 4 defendants. They receive sentences ranging from 15 to 20 years. But it is not over. 2 suspects, Harry and Ronald Barber, are still on the run. Within months, the FBI receives a tip that the 2 brothers are living in an apartment in Rochester, New York. Agents respond, and Ronald Barber answers the door. They arrest him and return him to California, where a jury convicts and sentences him to 15 years. He refuses to say where his brother Harry is. For 8 years, Harry remains a fugitive. Then, in 1980, a woman in Brookville, Pennsylvania, contacts the FBI.
I knew him as Brent.
She tells agents that her friend has been living with a man who told her he committed a famous bank burglary in California,
The other day, only because.
What's her name?
and that his real name is Harry Barber.
Harry Barber. Worried and nervous.
The woman tells the FBI that in an attempt to lead a legitimate life, the fugitive is working maintenance at a local campground.
Here, you know?
Agents move in and arrest him.
Hey, Barber.
Hey, Barber. The FBI, hands in the air. Drop flyers.
Harry Barber is convicted and sentenced to 20 years. Agents can finally close the case on the largest bank burglary in United States history. Authorities believe Emil Dincio and his gang committed more than a dozen bank burglaries, stealing over $30 million altogether. By putting them away, FBI agents from Ohio to California stopped one of the most sophisticated bank burglary rings of all time.